Just a little preview, waiting for whoever else is going to tune in. A surprise appearance from someone in the world of science that may, who knows, fingers crossed, may be certainly very encouraging and maybe of great help. A front page article in the Times, which hits me with some is a very profound, subtle but profound sorrow. A tidbit from some geological findings in Southeast Africa, some controversy around the possibility. Oh, wait a minute, sorry. The next is some reflection on what our terrestrial predecessor might have been like. We get some evidence about his actual life circumstances. And then there's the evidence, the search for evidence for life outside the solar system and controversy around that. Then there's the congressional hearings on UFOs, and then some reflections from David Brooks about what in God's name is driving the Trump herd. So did anyone besides Delia hear Science Friday last week on NPR?
No.
Okay. Well, she alerted me about this guy named Prasanta Chakrabarti. He's in the Department of Biological Sciences. He's an ichthyologist, a fishman by trade, with a heavy interest in evolution. Matter of fact, I just ordered his book, which is being released today on evolution. And in addition to being the director of the university, I didn't mention it's the Louisiana State University. Delia's medical alma mater. He's director of the Museum of Natural Science there, and most interestingly, on the faculty of their Center for Collaborative Knowledge. So apparently, he handled, kindly and deftly all kinds of questions coming at him for an hour. And at the end, Ira Flato said, "Well, what question would you like to have answered?" And what Delia said, he said, I didn't go back to listen to the recording. I think I will. He said, "I'd like to know how we really began. What was it? Maybe extraterrestrial intervention." That's a jaw dropper. So, needless to say, I'm going to do everything I can to get in touch with this guy, and we'll see what happens. But to have a possible, possible friend in the A-listers, that would be pretty good. Okay. I already got a friend in the A-list of producers. Now to have one in the A-list scientists, that's pretty good pairing. All right. The thing that kind of hit me with a funny kind of sorrow is a first page article on the drying up of the Great Marsh at the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where they empty into the Persian Gulf. Now, that's where Enki took his crew and set up the first settlement just north of the marsh on the beginning of the plain, the southern end of the plain in Mesopotamia. And that's partly because there were great resources there. There's petroleum very close to the surface. There were these reeds for building houses and boats. As a matter of fact, as late as the early 20th century, the marsh Arabs were living in structures, kind of like shaped like Quonset huts. Remember those from World War II? Um, uh, that looked almost exactly like carvings of reed structures from the tablets. And there may have been a deeper reason for Enki going there, because it's quite possible that when Nibiru was in the third orbit where Earth is now, there were areas like this, because there may have been a significant piece of their evolution that took place in an area like this, where sea and land are totally interspersed, like in a lot of parts of Bangladesh now. So it's it's where this interplanetary adventure of ours began, and it's dying. Saddam Hussein started it. He did excavations and channeling to begin to dry out the marsh in order to weaken the culture of the Shiite marsh Arabs, and now global heating is finishing the job, and vast areas of the marsh they're drying. I don't know if they're dying quite. They maybe could come back if the roots still are alive, but it looks bad. The photographs really look bad. So it's like, oh, this is something that connects us to the very beginnings, the earliest beginnings, and now we're destroying it. Okay. A little tidbit, it's like it doesn't confirm very much, but it fits the picture, put it that way. In southeast, the northeast corner of Union of South Africa, there's evidence way down, deeper than the gold mines, of early glaciation on Earth, ice ages. There was one that began about 2.5 billion years ago, and it involves periods, very cold periods of 200 million years or more. Some extreme cold periods lasting 10 million years at a time. Now, this is much deeper and longer glaciation than we know about on Earth in more recent ages. And it's not that this proves anything one way or another, but it's easier to understand such long cold periods when Earth was in the fifth orbit, which is what the tablets say, before the collision with Nibiru's moon. Earth was between Mars and Jupiter and much further from the sun. So that, it's not, let's just say it's not incompatible with the Earth being further from the sun. A tidbit, but we collect these little tidbits along the way.
So Mike, when did that happen? The shift in orbits? I've been rereading, trying to get all this stuff in my brain and the time frames and stuff. So
I have to get my cheat.
Is there a cheat sheet in here?
I have to get my cheat sheet. Yeah, on page 25.
25.
No.
No.
We don't have, no, it doesn't go back that far. No, that's,
and it's not page 25 of the little book.
No, 20, but that chronology only goes back to the appearance of the hominin line on Earth 14 million years ago. So I don't know how we could try to reconstruct that.
But Nibiru's moon became our moon, right?
I don't know. Again, don't know. That was a pretty nasty collision. It may have shattered.
Because people talk about the time before the moon.
Yeah, so that, that's I don't know how to begin to tackle that timeline,
Okay.
when, I mean, there's when Nibiru was ejected from the third orbit, clearly, since the civilization was able to survive, they had evolved to quite a high level in the third orbit, and then got ejected. So when was that?
Okay.
I haven't found a source of information to try to time that, and then to try to time the collision on one of the passages of the inner solar system. Okay.
I missed that collision. What, can you just recapitulate a minute or two? I just couldn't get onto my computer.
Hi, Reed.
What have we said so far?
I was asking him a question and taking him a little off.
He's looking to date the crash of Nibiru's moon into our planet when it was in the fifth orbit and sending it into the third orbit. That's what we're asking about, and we don't have a date for that. Did I
Yeah.
hit the? Yes, I did. Okay. Next, interestingly, another book being published today, Cave of Bones, by a paleoanthropologist who's been working in South Africa since 1996, named Lee Berger. And it's about findings of one of the earlier hominins, Homo naledi, N-A-L-E-D-I, a critter about 4'10", around 100 pounds, 110 pounds. These findings seem to range from 335,000 BCE to 240,000 BCE. Now, Homo erectus, the dates for Homo erectus are 1.8 million years BCE to about 200,000 BC. So they overlap. They're contemporary furry little critters. That's where we think of them as, we tend to think of more like ape-like. But in a very deep cave in South Africa, there's extraordinary finding. It's to get there. It's difficult for us to get there. Dr. Berger had to lose 50 pounds in order to squeeze through. There's one on the passage down to this chamber deep underground. There's one stretch where you have to do like a Superman crawl, and another where you go down a vertical chute. They're very, very narrow. At one point, it's 11 inches wide. Okay, so they could do it, and skinny humans can do it too with difficulty. What he found was in the deepest chamber, and there are other branches that haven't been explored yet, but in the sizable chamber way down, it's, I don't know how long it is, as the worm crawls. It's probably maybe like 3/4 of a mile down. It's long. Okay, so here are these creatures, our cousins, crawling down with torches. Okay, headlamps haven't been invented yet, or helmets. Crawling down to do burials. There are these pits and whole collection of bones, skeletons are in there with some shaped stones that look like tools. So it was like, wait a minute, these creatures had a culture that had this kind of relationship to death, certainly to, this couldn't have been for everybody. So this would be, somebody special. This would be, they had social structure, they had an elite that got buried in this extraordinary way. Now, if something like this was going on for this contemporary Homo erectus, there may have been, there must have been levels of social organization and ritual, for our terrestrial predecessors.
So Mike, what's the dating on these bones?
I didn't
So
extract
they
that
were Homo
article.
erectus.
They're in the range of 300,000 BCE in that range.
Okay,
Okay.
so before we came along.
Somewhat before, but the mutiny and the authorization for the crafting of Homo sapiens was 310 BCE, according to the tablets. Okay. So they were around when we got made. Okay.
And they were perhaps more developed than we give them credit for.
That's
perhaps right. They were not just fuzzy toys.
and our looking down on them in that way, thinking of them as just barely above chimps. Of course, chimps are smart, but chimps are very limited in their social organization. Our looking down on them may be a remnant of the early humans looking down on their terrestrial predecessors. So we thought that elitism and racism, I've speculated that it began with the second level of hybridization, the mating of Anunnaki males and human females, and those superior humans looking down on the smaller, less intelligent, darker humans. But maybe they, in turn, look down, on their ape-like parent.
Another thing I don't have a good feeling for the timing of is how long were they messing with us to make us? What was that interval? And before they started to breed with us? Because part of my sense of the beings, the racism may have come from the fact that the Anunnaki were trying, among other things, to make light-skinned beings. And if they failed, they would reject the beings. And many of the groups that wound up as indigenous peoples were dark-skinned.
I don't see any reason to think that they wanted lighter skinned beings. They wanted creatures that looked somewhat like themselves. They seem to have wanted hairless beings, but the lighter skins came about just through interbreeding. Whether that was purposeful or not, it's hard to know.
Well, were they light-skinned?
They were light-skinned, but the first humans were dark-skinned. And we know that from the hunter-gatherers in Europe before the next wave of agriculturally oriented humans came in. The first inhabitants of Europe from Africa were dark-skinned people. Okay, so that wasn't achieved in the original laboratory engineering.
Okay, but they engineered first and created us, and then started breeding with us.
Yes, and the
sequence.
The authorization by An was 310,000 BCE. the first Neanderthals were, the first findings that we have are 60,000 years later. The first Homo sapien findings that we have are 150,000 years later. So, yeah, and the interbreeding was, okay, 100,000 BCE. So between the first Homo sapiens fossils, the first fully successful crafting, that was 150,000 years BCE. The Anunnaki interbreeding was 100,000 BC, so the 50,000 years in between. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, okay, so that's, you know, that fills in the picture in a bit more.
Yes.
So about looking down, racism, all of that. All right, now here's something, articles in the Times and in other publications about the work of an astrophysicist. I think that's what he is, Avi Loeb. Okay.
It's been in the been in the newspapers quite a bit lately.
Yes, yes. Okay, what I gather is that in 2014 there was a big meteor that broke up, and analysis of its track indicated that because of its speed, it had to have come from outside the solar system. And what Avi Loeb has been doing, and fill me in if I don't have this right, Linda, that in the track of the meteor, he's been looking for debris, looking for stuff that fell as it was burning through the atmosphere. And apparently there's a track of these there's minute spheres, metallic spheres, right? Correct?
Yeah, the key here is that based on how it burned and how long it burned, that it had to be metallic. And so what they're doing is basically they've made this giant magnet sled that they've figured out how to drag across the bottom of the ocean. And then they collect what they get off the sled and they're analyzing them. And they had a whole probable area that they were looking into. And they did an area that couldn't have been associated as a control. So they know what the bottom stuff that comes off the sled would look like, mostly volcanic ash, apparently. So anyway, that's some of it. I'll certainly butt in again.
Okay, okay, so then there are these minute metallic spheres, like sand. They're really small. It's like sand, is the terms that, you know, but they're spherical. And the interesting thing to Dr. Loeb is that the chemical analysis indicates a manufactured artifact, that this is not native ore from just any old rocky asteroid or meteor. Like this is stuff that was made in some way. The mix of
was that, Mark, was that determined by the chemical composition or by the shape or by structural analysis?
Chemical composition, minerals and isotopes, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And okay, so, you know, like, all right, I mean, to us, it's like, Yeah, okay, so there's life somewhere, that's cool to have a piece of evidence, to kind of quiet down all this crazy speculation as if it's possible that it's only here, so, sorry to, with our apologies to the Bible thumpers, like, oh, well, I'm sorry, we got a solid piece of evidence. But what's most interesting to me is the hostility that he's raised. He's not just being, the community is not saying, well, we need to re-examine. No, they're saying he's crazy, that his methodology is terrible, that, he was a great scientist and still he got into this shit,
I'm just such a fan. I've been following everything he puts out. He's publishing, on Medium. If you've never seen that website, and he's putting all his updates on that. It's sort of self-publishing, but you can follow him so you'll see what he has to say. It's medium.com.
Yeah, but again, this is not the first time, but it's interesting, that the pattern just keeps repeating and repeating. So the scientific community is reacting as if he's betraying them. How dare he?
That's happened often enough before, right? From everybody, from Einstein to Velikovsky to modern day. No, it's not surprising to hear this, but it's interesting. He's an Israeli, top of it all. Not very well.
Of all the nerve, right?
But talk about, he's the director of some institute at Harvard, for crying out loud. You just can't have a better certificate of academic excellence than that.
Right. So, well, so that they're not
going to. Still, they make fun, and still they make.
Right.
Still, they make fun.
Right. Well, when your beliefs, when what you love to think, when you have a high level of investment in what you have concluded is your truth, the truth, when that's interrupted, the affective response is powerful. And one of the defenses against that awful feeling is to attack the perceived cause of your distress. Another favorite defense against that feeling is to dismiss it all as, it doesn't matter, insignificant. Who cares? Okay. And now I saw clips of it. I didn't see the whole thing. The testimony before Congress from the pilots and others about the reality of unidentified flying objects. This was impressive. Personally, I'm clapping because this kind of publicity, again, this is personal interest here. It's going to make it easier for a number of producers to come into the movie project.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, you can't buy this kind of publicity.
Right. That's right. That's right. This is like, okay, and what goes on in their minds, of course, is, wow, this movie will sell, so okay, why not? That's what we want.
It will also educate, for God's sakes. I think of so many rabbi colleagues that are, how should we say, hung up on stuff that is not near to reality. And here you're pushing a little reality down the face. When I get it, I'm going to push it down my friends' faces, believe me.
Well, again, this was the resistance here wasn't active like with Avi Loeb, but it was passive. I looked at, all the media the next day. They're covering all kinds of stuff, small, medium, large, statewide, national, international, for 20, I think it was about 36 hours, nothing appeared. Like,
Did you read the final article that the New York Times put out on
Yeah.
page A16 or whatever it was?
right.
I would love it if you'd send it to me because I
Oh.
can't get it. And I'd
Oh.
like to see what I've seen reviews of it, but not it. You don't do it now, but sometime
Yeah,
I think about it.
It's easy to search if I have the reporter's name. I don't, anyway, I can do a search by,
Yeah, no, some other time.
but it
It's
was,
fine, but it was apparently very, I mean, I hear some people saying this is the biggest news of the century.
and they buried it in the middle of the paper and they published it a day or two late.
Days later, yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, wow, I mean, isn't that special?
What does that mean?
Well,
Scared,
fear, yeah.
scared for their reputation.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna be,
They cover Marjorie Taylor Greene.
yeah, well, that was the thing. They covered all kinds of, crazy stuff, crazy people, all kinds of horrible things,
That would be considered human frivolity and bizarreness. But going against the grain in the sciences, you can be accused of being crazy. And what's the one thing those of us who are not crazy yet prefer to avoid, and that is an accusation of craziness.
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
It's a risk you got to take sometimes. I'm thinking of that, knowing that I'll be called crazy should I be introducing any of this to my colleagues. That's going to happen. So you have to live with it, I guess. It's what I'm saying. You have to risk it.
yeah.
Well, and it helps that these threads are starting to show up, right? Like the threads of that hearing and the threads of what's going on with Avi Loeb. And I mean, I so admire him because I mean, you say this just took incredible courage because so many people are telling him he's nutty, but he's stepping out and doing something that's never been done before. That's what science is. And it's all being privately funded. He came up with millions of bucks to do this expedition, and he's going back, and I'm sure it's already paid for. People want to know the answer. This is the best science I've seen in a long time. I'm very excited about it.
But that actually is a big point that for anything outside the box, you have to go outside the traditional funding boxes. You got to have a patron, just like arts and sciences in the old days, always had to have a patron,
Well, I guess the one good thing about this whole process of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer is that the patronage is out there. And there are enough people available that things can be accomplished, like whoever's paying for Avi Loeb's things. They want to know the answer. So do I.
Right, and they also want they want the satisfaction of doing something meaningful with their money.
Sure.
And Andrew Carnegie said it was a total waste, if somebody died with his fortune intact.
Good for him. Yeah.
Oh, we're zipping along here. Okay. Now, David Brooks' piece from August the 2nd. I sent the link. Not everybody would have read it, I'm sure. So it's I'll just some phrases, sentences that I've underlined, what's going on here? Why is this guy still politically viable? Okay, in our standard story, we anti-Trumpers, the good guys, forces of progress and enlightenment, and the Trumpers are reactionary bigots and authoritarians. Not entirely untrue, but he says another story, and that begins in the 60s when high school grads went off to fight in Vietnam, but the children of the educated class got college deferments, like me.
My brothers too.
In reality, the educated class lives in a world up here. Okay, and everybody else is living in a world down there. Members of our class are always publicly speaking out for the marginalized, but somehow we always end up building systems that serve ourselves. It's the meritocracy. We built an entire social order that sorts and excludes people on the basis of the quality that we possess most: academic achievement, brains, and opportunity. This, by the way, sidelight, is one of the historic sources of the hatred of the Jews. They're smart, and and that's how they get their power. So these anti-Semites just don't have met enough dumb Jews.
They just have to get around to it. But that's pretty much true of all bigotry, don't you think?
Yeah.
You're faced with face to face. Yeah.
Okay, but so these days, middle-class children lose out to the rich children at school, and middle-class adults lose out to the elite graduates at work. And we've taken over whole professions. Only 0.8% of college students graduate from the super elite, 12 colleges. But in 2018, somebody polled the staff at the Times and the Journal, Wall Street Journal, and 50% of the staff writers had graduated from the 29 most elite universities.
Wow.
Okay. So elite graduates monopolize. This is from a book by a sociologist, Daniel Markovits, Jew, of course. Elite graduates monopolize the best jobs and at the same time invent new technologies that privilege super skilled workers, making the best jobs better and all other jobs worse. Free trade makes the products we buy cheaper, and our jobs are unlikely to be moved to China. Open immigration makes our service staff cheaper, but new, less educated immigrants aren't likely to put downward pressure on our wages as they do on, people lower down the scale. I mean, and that's why, recent legal immigrants, can get, like in Miami, they can be ferocious about the people who are, quote, sneaking in, because it's true, it is hurting them economically. It does push them further down because they're people who are willing to work for, peanut wages. We take for granted and benefit from systems that have become oppressive. Elite institutions have become so politically progressive in part because the people in them want to feel good about themselves, and they take part in systems that exclude and reject. It's easy to understand why people in less educated classes would conclude that they are under economic, political, cultural, and moral assault. Trump understood that there was a great demand for a leader who would stick his thumb in our eyes on a daily basis. And here's a sociologist I hadn't heard about, E. Digby Baltzell. Quote, history is a graveyard of classes which have preferred history is a graveyard of classes which have preferred caste privileges to leadership. That is the destiny our class is flirting with now. When will we stop behaving in ways that make Trumpism inevitable?
That is a great sentence. The history one about history. I mean, it describes a great deal of the changeovers in Europe from the monarchies to the revolutions to current times. At least in my view of it is there always is a courtier class, and it always fails. It takes a while, but it almost always fails.
Yeah, there was a book actually just published on the 1848 revolutions all over Europe, that succeeded and then looked like they failed, but in the long run they succeeded because the monarchies all came back, but they really did change a great deal in all of European society. Now, in what does the Mesopotamian tale give another framework for all of this? Well, there's one obvious piece, and that is the gradations in the human population on the basis of ability. Because we have a pretty wide range. I mean, there are different, say, Jim, I would say, there's a range of equine personalities, but probably not a very wide range of equine IQ. There's probably some somewhat dumber horses and somewhat smarter horses, but not that wide a range. We have a very, very wide range, a wide normal range. And that's thanks to the second level hybridization of the Anunnaki males and human commoners. So we're vulnerable there because we have an elite that's psychologically, spiritually, somewhat tenuous because they've got the inner slave personality buried deep inside that they have to keep down, and it's possible for them to help themselves do that in the intrapsychic process by in the sociological scheme to put down the less intelligent, less skilled humans and exploit them rather than be generous and kind and help, and like there's plenty for all, and there's no reason, why you have to be impoverished for me to have a mansion. There's no reason. There's plenty of goods to go around for everybody to be comfortable. Nobody has to be starving and suffering, but we fall into that pattern, and out of unacknowledged inner basically insecurity. And then we become addicted. Those who get up there, fortunately I'm protected from that, but those who get up there become addicted to the wealth and you try to take some money away, from these ultra wealthy people, and they start to scream as if you're taking blood out of their bodies, and all you're doing is, increasing the marginal tax rate and, trying to take their annual income down, from 100 million to 80 million, and they scream. They scream bloody murder as if they're being robbed of, anyway. Shut up about that. But there's another angle on it, and that is that the what I call the primary or the obvious exploiters, they come down ultimately from the Enlil crowd. The kings with their treasuries and taxes, and their, something that Jim pointed out to me the other day, their control of grain storage, okay? And the kings with their supporting cast of nobles, okay? Well, the kings were appointed originally, the human kings were appointed by Enlil. But they were anointed by the priests who were instructed by Enki. So relatively speaking, Enki was kinder to us, and of course he was our maker and our champion, but only relatively speaking, because allied to the kings were the prelates and the bishops and the priests, and sometimes they were opposed, to royal power, but more often, they were allied with it.
They were certainly in European history, they were allied back and forth. It's just gruesome. It's just that nobody could, the records weren't good enough, memories weren't long enough. It was just, we only found it out more recently in the last couple of centuries, let's say, but they would each help each other stay on top.
Right.
Because there was a great human mass of peasants, and we'll call them above peasants, the bourgeoisie, so to speak, traders, and so on. And they were there to be maneuvered and manipulated by the secular authority and the religious authority.
Right. And so, under the authority of Enki and his, spiritual, intellectual, religious descendants, learn, there's the origin of elite learning. The universities were all outgrowths of the Roman Catholic Church originally.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until the 18th, mid-18th century, in the United States, or the nascent United States, where an institution of higher learning was founded that was not under the auspices of some religious organization. It lasted that long.
Which was that? You mentioned it before, I forgot.
Oh, I think it was maybe
Columbia?
No. I think it was maybe William and Mary.
Oh.
Columbia is interesting. A little sideline here. It's one of the only issues that we know of where Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr were on the same side. They both opposed the founding of King's College, which became Columbia, under the auspices of the Church of England.
Mm-hmm.
They lost, and it remained an Episcopalian, linked institution. There's a chapel on the campus right next to the original library. That's St. Paul's Chapel.
Most places I've been had some private universities, had some religious affiliation, Emory, Duke, Hopkins.
Hopkins,
Yeah,
Well, some of that, a good part of it has to be because, so to speak, that's where the money was.
oh, absolutely.
I
No
mean,
question.
if you weren't a parishioner of some strong religious institution in your locale or region, you probably weren't making a lot of money
Yeah.
because of the networking.
so what we see as the primary exploiters, they derive their ultimate authority from Enlil, and the other group, the more not this I would call a secondary exploiters, they derive their authority from Enki. Both working, together most of the time to exploit the masses. So today you have the politicians with the lobbyists, connecting them to the corporate heads, which are connected to the wealthy and stockholders. So that's one exploiting category. But then you have the intelligentsia, cultural leaders in music, literature, film, fashion, with their wealthy supporters. Again, jockeying for who's in charge. So right now, the business oriented folks, they secretly deprecate the masses, and duplicitously rave about them at the same time. Trump once said, "I love you uneducated people."
I love my uneducated. Oh, the poorly educated, I think, was
So that, that manipulates their resentment, the natural resentment, for the elite, and they deflect it. And the others, us good guys, we sympathize towards the masses, but we're benefiting from that advantage, and we are a sitting target because we have not taken a leadership role, in evening things out. Maybe Bernie Sanders is an exception, but
There was a time I did read the Brooks article, and many good points in it, and but I thought he either de-emphasized or left out a point. I recall there was a time when the let me try to peg the dates, around the year 2000, before and somewhat after, let's say 10 years before, 1990s to 2010, about, yeah, because 2015 was no, 2008, before the financial massacre, is that venture capitalists in general, the word was out, certainly on the West Coast. I was told on the East Coast also, is don't bring us projects that don't have an inclusion for manufacturing in China. We won't read them. We won't listen. If you don't have your manufacturing in China, if you have it in the US, forget it. You won't get an appointment.
interesting.
And it was just how that particular herd, and they won't deny that they're a herd, that particular herd just saw where the best money was. That's what they thought at the time. Some smart people I know now are saying, and have said it for, I've heard them say for at least 10 years, is they want American manufacturing because of the ease of communication. But it was that was fairly severe and pretty widespread. not 100%, but pretty widespread. And I don't know if venture capitalists consider themselves to be part of an elite, but possibly they do. That was a joke.
They're just regular guys.
That's the pitch.
Well, there was another, gosh, I thought we're zipping through all this stuff. There was another interesting piece. I don't know how much, how clear we can be about it, because it's a bit, it's a strange, it's a review of a book published in the 1920s, maybe, titled Studies in Classic American Literature by one and only D.H. Lawrence. And it was reviewed, the book was got a recent review by A.O. Scott, who usually does movies. What he did was to, read in the classics, Hawthorne, Melville, Whitman, and then later, famous writers, and he used that to understand the quote American character, and this article, the review goes all over the place. It's very complex, but the main thing is that one of the things that Lawrence concluded is that this is a very violent culture, that we fall back on violence very easily. Now, I don't know whether that's more true than European cultures, but they may have, except for, actually, we're not, Russia is not a European country in the classical sense, they may have moved mostly away from their violent traditions, and we may just be behind the curve in terms of time, in terms of cultural evolution. If Homo sapiens are an experiment of the field, maybe the United States is a later experiment, and still wrestling with explosive violence.
Well, I on the current scene, not so well known is that China has almost pre-revolution, I want to say it has protests that could readily develop into violent behavior, crowd behavior. There's just many on a daily basis. It's a big country for a lot of people, and they don't get along with their government, local government, so well. They're just put down pretty quickly and brutally.
Yeah.
Why don't we hear more about that?
There's
I have no idea. I was told this by a really bright Chinese guy, young, middle-aged, about 35 years old, a kind of a archaeologist in his field, and personally, and over a year's time, year plus, we got to know each other. He loosened up a little bit, and he told me something about his country, but not much. I never asked. I just let him talk. And I mean, you don't get to where he was, even though he was still a student. I met him when he was going to a grad school here in this country, and you have to be a Communist Party member. You don't advance to that level without. But he was easy with the I'll do what the party says, and then doing something. He was fluid in that way that you get to be when, if you're bright and if you've been immersed in those necessities for long enough.
Mm.
But yeah, it was like, you know, I will repeat one. I don't think it was said in confidence at the time, but I don't think anybody here can do anything with it. You don't have his name. He said, Jim, we need guns. And I really don't think I was being tested. I think he was sincere. I said, no, you don't, no. Machetes maybe, no guns. You don't need guns. Because the pushback from the government, the federal government, would be so severe. You'd have whole families got wiped out.
Well, they have they have a very violent history in the not so remote past.
Yeah.
Not just the Red Army and the Kuomintang, but the Boxer Rebellion. They've got a very bloody history.
The country is so topographically, there are well, I don't remember any numbers, but it looks to me like it's a terrible place to do much farming. It's hilly, so much is hilly. There are some plains and so on, but you don't have this like in the US, this huge basic Midwest and high plains area. And so there's a constant fight for enough food for the population. And once again, he who controls the granary controls the masses.
Yeah, we get some reports from Westerners, and they can't write while they're there, but when they come back and they don't have any particular interest in returning, so they don't have to worry
Right.
visas being denied. And they do bring back reports of a great deal of discontent in the hinterlands, in the provinces, and in the rural areas.
Yeah.
People-
Non-urban.
People very, very unhappy. And that's why they're putting down that's why the horrible things they're doing to the Uyghurs in the West. China has, when it's been a strong centralized government, their threat, their disintegration has always started at the periphery, whether it was the Mongols coming from the north. So that's what that's why they're terrified of these Muslims in the West. Because the central government is not very solid. So anyway,
It sort of seems to have the assent, by and large, currently, of much of the population. Most of it. In spite of these local eruptions that are, according to my friend, are basically constant. And the assent goes along with this because there is some memory of when there was not a strong central government and there was killing everywhere.
yeah. Well, have other articles, but I didn't think we'd ever get to them. So, but all right, I'll mention one, where anybody wants to look into it. Recently published book, Animal Spirits, the American Pursuit of Vitality from Camp Meeting to Wall Street. Just published. And it's of interest to us, I think, because we pay attention to the workings of the field, both as it has direct impact on genetic evolutionary processes, but also its role in the transmission of racial memory, of species memory, from early times through the present, that things are passed down not just by custom and law and stories and frank traumatization. Things are also passed along, in the species field, in the human portion of the oversoul. So we pay some attention to how it manifests, and this book is about how it's shown up in spiritual focused movements throughout the centuries in this country. It's kind of interesting. It's like in parallel with the standard religiosity, has been some different levels, different kinds of spiritual awareness. Author is Jackson Lears. There's an illustration of an evangelical camp meetings. And of course it was nominally Christian, but what was going on there had nothing to do with the church.
Were these what kinds of events? I have to admit I haven't read that article. It looked interesting. I just didn't get that far. So what kind of were these like revivals?
Revivals, camp meetings, yeah.
Back in like the early 20th century?
Earlier. There was a lot of them in the 19th century, before Civil War.
Okay.
And that's when
There were certainly a lot of them, because my grandmother would take my mother to these tent revivals. And had really, I've got a great story I'll tell you sometime. It's too long for now, but yeah, it was real, I think.
well, one of the more successful of those fervent spiritual upwellings attached itself to Christianity and became the Mormons. That began in Upper New York State, which was a wellspring of those sorts of things. Let me see if I can. Vitalism as a transatlantic phenomena. John Maynard Keynes revived it to describe the unruly energy propelling capitalist growth. Others spoke of soul or spirit, energy or force, flux or creative evolution. The author here, Lears, found outcroppings of the idea everywhere in the American landscape, in indigenous cosmologies, evangelical camp meetings, in ecological ethics, and recent epigenetic discoveries. Um, a countercultural way of thinking ebbed and flowed, but it was never fully quashed, despite the Puritans, Cartesians, medical doctors, positivists, materialists, and scientific debunkers. This is funny, the first traffic jam in US history occurred in February 1913. And there was a crush of New Yorkers jostling for seats at a lecture by the celebrity philosopher Henri Bergson, because his topic was the élan vital, the vital force, the vital spirit. Okay, the notion of a dynamic life force, a current sent through matter that transcends finality and animates the world. Amazing thing was the lecture was going to be in French. it was still a crush of people. In Europe, it went back to Mesmer, who of course was, attacked and debunked and, ridiculed. There was a 19th century, late 19th century writer called Reichenbach, who called this force the Ode. So, it came across the ocean, put it that way. Anyway, it's a good. This book is, for those who pick it up, is a good antidote to the, to the materialist. Materialist, what should we call it? Materialist, mechanist, conspiracy.
That'll do him.
Well, for those who missed the early three quarters, like John, we're recorded, and I don't see how to. Oh, here it is. I expanded the menu bar. Can stop the recording. So I think we're out of gas. At least I am. But I'm here to listen if anybody wants to pump more things in.
So I haven't watched that whole 90-minute hearing on UAPs. So I've read lots of stuff about it, though. I'd love to hear what you thought.
I didn't see the whole thing. I only saw clips.
But from what the clips then, tell me what is it a big deal? Is it a little deal? What's going on?
They were very believable.
Yeah.
There was some pilots talking about, their experience. There was one guy who had not experienced all that much, but but he had, dealt at length with a lot of primary experiencers. The resistance, I think, to accepting the pretty unarguable reality, like this stuff is real, and you might draw the line at abductions, but for which the evidence actually is quite strong. But but the evidence of craft that have no relation whatsoever to the kind of things that we can fly around in. The evidence is overwhelming. So the being ignored and denied and covered up, I think the acknowledgement of extraterrestrials being around threatens to de-repress our memories of our origins and the extraterrestrials that are in us. And that the pure extraterrestrials crafted us, that's heavily repressed. And we enlist the authorities, religious, scientific, even political, to help us maintain that repression.
Like I may be reaching here a little bit. The little bit that I saw on TV of the hearings was I saw one former pilot describe, and he looked quite uncomfortable, and I had a sense, and this is where I could be quite wrong, is I had a sense that his discomfort was being asked to reveal intimate details of something he had observed, and that it wasn't just a normal debriefing for him. There was it seemed to me that for him the experience was intimate, and now he was in a very public place talking about it. If I'm accurate, and I may not be, that sense of intimacy that I thought he had, that he exhibited, was due to exactly what you say, a contact with repressed memories of something that's really intimate for us, our generation.
Mhm.
And many of the reporters, like that pilot, are in a very difficult position. Like we said before, you hate to be told that you're crazy.
Yeah.
But encounters of the first kind, where you just, you see something impossible in the sky. You see something traveling at 1,000 miles an hour, and it makes a right angle turn, without slowing down, that sort of thing. Or, just ships, with strange shapes. But the closer encounters become problematic for the reporter, because it becomes a somewhat confusing personal experience. I was talking with someone recently who I've known for a long time. Jim, you may have met him. First name Peter. He's a UFO researcher. He and his sister had a very powerful experience, and he was very much affected by what was this ship that was hovering over their house, and it's very, very difficult. It was very, very difficult, and still is, for him to sort it out, because there's the memory, there's the traumatization which affects the memory, but there's also the direct effect on neural processes of the entity's purposeful or just by chance, that his mind is actually affected by what's going on. And so it becomes quite a conundrum to get, a completely reliable story. the joke about the tinfoil hats, is not completely nuts. Because, the abduction literature makes it clear that the way that they initially, the entities, beings in the ships, the way that they grab control is through your mind. They grab your consciousness. And people who have had the experience of being abducted are terrified of this happening again. And somebody came up with a kind of a helmet to protect people from further abductions. Sounds crazy, but it was a leather and metal contraption that apparently was, at least it had a placebo effect, but it may actually have had a real effect. So the most telling interactions are very difficult. The only way that people have been debriefed is actually under hypnosis. Because of how heavy the repression, the induced amnesia is. Yeah, and the government, the religious authorities, their caution may not be misplaced. It could be catastrophically traumatizing to have a sudden de-repression of memory and have it all flood back of how it was when we started. Maybe that's why the movies, ever since 2001 Space Odyssey, that's why the movies have been giving us the story in bits and pieces, tiny bits and pieces. If you track, like the movies, I've documented a small number of them in the addendum in Evolution Diverted, the addendum called the movies. But many movies, their storyline, it reads like it's lifted out of one of the tablets, or a bunch of the tablets. So, and the movies for the most part are pretty bad, but not all. Maybe we have been getting introduced in small ways. And that's why I think the Hybrids, the movie, has a chance of success because of the story is slipped in there. It's the belief system of this community. We're not saying it should be your belief system, audience, that there's this community that believes this. Okay, and here's their story. And the whole thing is in the context of, that's just a movie. Don't be afraid, it's just a movie. It's like it was just a dream, and so it's cushioning. It's emotional cushioning. Which, imagine that you've never heard any of this stuff before. Never heard any of the, Mesopotamian tale, none of this, and somebody, gives you a 25 word, summary. Here's what happened, what can anyone, what can the ordinary intelligent person make of that? What can you do with that? You absolutely have to deflect it.
I've actually done that a few times with people where, we talk about misinformation and stuff out in the ether. And then I said, and it's really too bad that people aren't willing to accept the real truth. And then with a straight face, I say that we were, that we were genetically engineered by aliens. And you know what the response is? They break out in laughter.
Right.
And I say, no, I'm not kidding. No, I say, it never made any sense to me why we didn't accept the stories that were handed down to us from previous cultures. It's always seemed very strange to me that we assumed that what they said was myth and meaningless, and we assumed that everything they built was meaningless, like, or maybe they were just like in Göbekli Tepe and all those places. Well, they didn't really. It's like they had some mythology that made them take all their efforts and put them into building these megalithic structures.
Right. So the only thing that keeps you or that person from accepting a crazy idea is to assume that the ancient people were crazy.
Well, or at least didn't have, there was something really dumb about, or
All right,
something.
really, right.
But when you put it all together and you look at what we have left and try to tell yourself a coherent story out of it, there is not one.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't say exactly crazy, but they were deluded. They confused dream with reality.
Right.
They made up these gods, which obviously couldn't exist. I mean, nothing could have done that.
Been that tall or lived that long.
10,000 years ago, they were flying through the air. Right. Sure.
Right.
And so they made up these fantastic stories, and then they built all these pyramids and temples and and treasuries and and went to war to serve these non-existent gods. You might say it's a bit disrespectful. Just a bit.
Yeah, isn't that right? And I just don't understand why people I don't have more humility in terms of this and say, there's really we're missing a piece or more than one piece. And so that the whole Sumerian tale is one big piece.
Well, it's our origin, which was shameful. It's our service to the gods, which was shameful. And that's a big part of, what's caused us to forget. To forget. Forgetting was a big part of it. Modern astronomy, developed, like from Ptolemy and then Copernicus and Bruno, all the way up, and these fantastic discoveries. They were just recovering knowledge that had been, in detail, explicitly, known and forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Forgotten. The knowledge was forgotten, along with the painful history. Yeah, the thing about amnesia is that it's a blanket phenomenon. You can't just forget this piece. You have to forget the whole context.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of science was lost, a lot of mathematics was lost, and then a lot of the discoveries were just rediscoveries, which may help to explain why they came so fast. They were still in the field, and they were just picked up because they were still around, even though they weren't written down.
Well, or there were still people who remembered how to do things that were wandering teachers.
Yes, that too. Well, we've done it again. Had a good time. And, once again, I'm left with the thought. The well has got to have run dry. We have nothing more to talk about. And then somehow it just fills up again in the intervening weeks. So see you all in the second. Oh, I didn't put it. Anyway, I'm sorry. Second Tuesday in
September.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Night all.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Interesting, fun, Mike.
Good night,
Thank you.
all.